A lot of people now, they assume that I'm not English. They assume I'm from Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia.
22-year-old Joni Clark is an English convert to Islam.
I'm a typical white English girl under this, but you wouldn't think that, would you, really? Because all you can really see is my eyes and my hands.
Oh, there's nothing.
Joni lives with her 2 young sons in Penge. She's just told them that in a couple of weeks they'll be moving home. They don't want to leave, but she says they have no choice. Her family is being hounded out of the neighbourhood because she's a Muslim.
When I first moved to this area, I was just like a normal girl. I'd wear jeans, a T-shirt, boots, handbag, just casually dressed, how you see majority of women these days in England dress. As I started taking my religion a bit more seriously, I decided to wear the niqab. Living in an area where the majority of people are white British, they don't want me here. I receive abuse every single day. I get called like a traitor. I've had people shout at me terrorist. I've had people shout their cars, go home to my country, even though I'm in it. It's as if like I'm not human.
Recently, the verbal abuse has escalated into physical threats.
I was waiting to cross the road with my son in the pushchair and my 6-year-old son as well by my side. All of a sudden I heard a lady turn to me and said, "Oh, that man just chucked his cigarette at you. He tried setting you on fire." On another occasion, as soon as I started walking on the zebra crossing, instead of the man slowing down, he speeded up to the stage that he was about 5 feet away from hitting me.
Joni's life revolves around her faith, but she's also devoted to her children, and it's a desire to protect them that's ultimately compelling her to move.
It affects my children deeply, especially my 6-year-old. He always turns to me and he says to me, "Oh, Mum, why do these people always shout abuse at us? Like, what did we do to them?" It's not a good environment for your children to live in. So, yeah, I'm moving.
There are few official statistics, but there are claims that Muslims are being targeted and forced out of neighbourhoods across the UK.
One lady said she had graffiti scrawled on her front wall and her garden fence had been broken and neighbours had stopped talking to her, and she directly relates that fact that she was the only Muslim within that area.
There are incidences where families have tried to move out of areas which are predominantly Muslim, have actually had experiences which have driven them back into those areas. One family decided to move into an area which was predominantly white. It turns out that family suffered numerous incidences where pigs' heads were put outside their house. They also suffered graffiti all across their driveway, which was abusing their Muslim faith, to the point where the stress on the family meant that they packed up and they left the area.
Incidents like this are now being cited as evidence of a disturbing growth in anti-Islamic sentiment. In London alone, over the past year, recorded attacks on Muslims have risen by over 70%. In boroughs like Merton, Richmond, Hounslow, Waltham Forest and Islington, documented offences have actually tripled. But the man who runs the Metropolitan Police's hate crime department says it's wrong to describe this as a spike in attacks.
Over the last 12 months, there has been a rise in Islamophobic incidents and crimes that have been reported to us. They've gone from 406 over the last 12 months to 800, so that's about a 72% increase. That does not mean that there's more offending, that means there's better ways of recording it, and I'm really pleased about that.
Yet many incidents of anti-Muslim hate crimes go unreported. Victims sometimes avoid contacting the police, fearing they'll make matters worse.
We have seen that in several cases where people feel like, I better keep quiet and suffer in silence than report.
I know a few people that have been attacked, but they're too scared to go to the police about it because a lot of young Muslim girls, even like elderly women, they're too scared to do anything about it because they are intimidated into the corner.
Underreporting isn't the only factor obscuring the true extent of Islamophobia in Britain today. Data is limited because, unlike the Met, most police forces don't record attacks on Muslims as a specific hate crime. So the Home Secretary, Theresa May, has asked for all forces to record that data separately to show the true extent of attacks on Muslims in Britain, which charities and victim support groups say are running at worrying levels.
Good afternoon, Salman. How can I help?
Based in a secret location to protect the team, this is the only independent agency monitoring anti-Muslim prejudice across the UK. They say the majority of calls for help are from women.
We realised that Muslim women who were visible, who wore the hijab, the headscarf, were suffering more of the targeted abuse. And we also realised that women who wore the niqab, the face veil, suffered more aggressive incidences. So there was something about the face veil that in a way brought out the worst in the perpetrator.
Banned in France and debated by politicians over here, the niqab or veil is contentious even within Islam itself. Many argue that the hijab or headscarf is enough to ensure modesty.
I always take a bit and then a bit of the scarf, I lift it and I take it to the other shoulder just so it covers the chest area.
At a Muslim event in East London, fashion designer Zenia Khan is showing some of her creations.
We believe that women shouldn't show all of their hair and their beauty to every man. It should only be for our husbands, our fathers, our uncles, people that we're not allowed to marry. And we feel that when we put the headscarf on, it also helps in our behaviour.
Some non-Muslims believe that women who cover up in this way, or who conceal their faces with a niqab, are forced into doing so. But actually, it's often a personal choice.
I don't understand why society feels like, oh my gosh, this person is covering up and they're not part of society and it's degrading women. But if you actually go up to someone who wears a niqab or a hijab and just say to them, why are you wearing it? Did you choose to wear it? And I will tell you, 98% of the time they'll say, I chose to wear it because it's part of my faith.
In this country, the niqab is a very visible sign of religious difference and is becoming a more common sight on our streets. But it makes many observers feel uncomfortable, and some even feel justified in attacking the wearer. Brought up in East London, 18-year-old Meena is proud of her dual Bangladeshi-British heritage and her faith, but her decision to wear the veil has made her a target for aggression.
Myself and a friend were walking just back from the city. I noticed this woman, and all of a sudden, she started coming at us and sort of saying, like, what are you doing here? We don't trust you. And she pulled my face veil down and she pushed me to the floor.
During a 4-minute attack, Meena and her friend were repeatedly punched, slapped and kicked. The two girls had no choice but to fight back.
In the end, we sort of got her off us and we pushed her off us. It was only after it went through the court that we got a letter saying she had a knife on her.
The assault took place on a main road. Several people witnessed the incident, but rather than help Meena and her friend, some laughed. Others turned their backs.
Because it was such a busy road and, there was people opposite at the pub. They were just, they were just watching us. And I think that just because of the way I dress, people don't think I'm worth sort of rescuing.
Back in Penge, it's moving day. Joni is packing the last of the family's belongings before heading to their new home in East London.
I'm a little bit upset that we do have to leave this area because I've built my life here, with my family, I've made some friends. And with my son as well, he's a bit upset because he's having to move school and leave his friends, but within time he'll adjust to his new area and his new school, and hopefully he'll be very happy there. Where we're moving to, we're not going to get as much abuse because the area we're moving to, there are more Muslims there and they're used to seeing Muslims wearing the niqab as well.
Moving on from a place where she felt persecuted offers some hope for Joni. Many other Muslim women, however, have discovered that the trauma of suffering a hate attack has led them to become isolated.
It was really difficult to deal with at first. I think my friend, she sort of, she found it very upsetting straight away, and it really hit her hard, unfortunately. But for me, it sort of kicked in a few days afterwards because it got to a point where I was too scared to even go out to my driveway to throw something in the bin. I didn't go out that much for the next, 6 months. But even to this day, I'm not as adventurous as I was.
So, ladies, we've been discussing...
Sajja Mughal runs a Muslim women's support group in North London. During the past year, she's been overwhelmed with the number of women asking for counselling after being attacked.
We are seeing a rise in the number of Muslim women turn to us, telling us about incidences and attacks, be it verbal or physical abuse or even vandalism to their properties. An example is a lady, Muslim lady, visibly Muslim, wearing a headscarf, one of our users, travelling into local town here and being spat at, being called a terrorist, being told and shouted at, "Get off the bus." That's just one example. Some of these women initially found it hard to integrate into society. They lose their confidence, they need support, they need counselling. It's a long process. This is what people fail to understand. It's not just an attack, oh, deal with it, get over it. One user, she was punched on the street. It took her right back to being a baby. She didn't want to leave her home. She didn't want to leave her home. She didn't want to do anything.
In public spaces, those who attack can be identified and potentially held to account. Michael Ayouade was jailed for 4 years after being caught on CCTV punching 16-year-old Tasneem Kabir. He left her unconscious after claiming he felt intimidated by her appearance. On social media, however, names and faces can be hidden, providing a powerful forum for those inciting religious hatred or threatening violence, especially against women.
It's quite interesting to see that the same sort of trends we observe online as well. So people with the visible Muslims with the hijab and niqab on, they are being targeted. Cases include abusive behaviour to extreme cases like death threats.
At the anti-hate organisation Faith Matters, Rahman is responsible for monitoring anti-Muslim activity on social media. Today he's come across some disturbing images.
In the first image, like, you can see that there's a Muslim woman and she's praying, and there's a pig at the back of her. In the next picture, here you can see that this person has put a face of a Muslim woman with niqab, and he has then mentioned as well that Islam is the new plague in Europe. So these are some examples of the material we receive almost every day, targeting for the Muslim.
In the past year alone, Rahman has identified hundreds of images like these. Monitoring social media can be a depressing job for the analysts at Tell Mama. There's a fine line between freedom of speech and the criminal incitement of hatred towards a specific religious group or individuals. And on the web, there's a lot of hate, much of it directed at Islam and its followers.
So you can see Islam is one of the major words that's been used. You can see scum, very visible and connected to the words. They're all connected, obviously. You can see hate, disgusting, pedo, rapists, terrorists. You can see death here.
The word clouds that Imam produces can help distinguish specifically anti-Muslim crimes from more general abuse. The hatred on the web also encourages a culture of contempt that may make some feel that violence against Muslims is somehow acceptable. And this came from social media?
Yeah, from one page, one date, one day.
Paris, Tunisia, Brussels, Copenhagen, all targeted by terrorists who claim to be doing so in the name of Islam. The damage caused to these countries is still reverberating, while the attacks there are also causing real harm here. Recent research has revealed a clear link between international terrorist incidents by radical Islamists and a rise in anti-Muslim hatred on our streets. It's been called the ISIS effect.
If you look at data, they show high escalations of anti-Muslim abuse after what I would call trigger events. For example, the ISIS use of beheadings, Trojan horse, and the Tunisia and Paris attacks. After the Paris attacks, the hashtag #KillAllMuslims was trending on the UK Twitter system. So, in effect, that just shows you how the feelings of animosity are towards Muslims.
If it's an international incident, it actually picks up a momentum online, so it's an immediate reaction to online, so within social media sphere attacks and anti-Muslim sentiments that you can see there, and then it will pick up later on within 3 to 4 days attacks on a street level. But when an incident takes place, and I'll give you an example, like the Charlie Hebdo attack that took place in January in Paris, so the Met has reported that only during January they had 96 attacks, 96 anti-Muslim attacks within 1 month.
Hasina was assaulted last year in an attack she believes was motivated by the conflict in the Middle East.
I was walking to work on Monday morning, as everyone does, through a busy shopping centre in Bristol, and a man came charging towards me, really aggressive, really angry. I thought he was going to hit me, and he was spitting at me repeatedly, And I think I asked him what his problem was, and he said something about your people killing Christians in the Middle East, and he was just ranting at me. It wasn't until I got to work and sort of looked in the mirror that I then saw it, you know, all sort of across me. It was disgusting. It was really, really horrible. And it's humiliating as well to have someone do that to you in public.
In recent years, British far-right groups have also sought, like their radical Islamist counterparts, to divide communities. The English Defence League has been targeting Waltham Forest, a borough with a large Muslim population. Today, Fayez from Tel Mama is visiting a mosque in the area to find out how people are holding up.
Just recently, when we were doing a fundraising on TV appeal, someone probably didn't like the Muslim. He phoned and he was more or less swearing at a young man who was taking the call. And what he was saying, I'm going to burn your mosque down. The young man, mashallah, he kept on talking to him, and gradually for 20 minutes or so, he changed his tune.
You take a very open door approach to people.
Open door. We need to interact with them.
The mosque's open-door policy and decision to engage with the wider community in Leighton is designed to weaken the potential influence of both right-wing and Muslim extremists in the area. It's a strategy that's also being employed at what was once Britain's most notorious place of worship, the Finsbury Park Mosque. Far from being known as a place to pray, in the early 2000s the Finsbury Park Mosque was splashed across the front pages as an extremist camp in the heart of London, controlled by the now imprisoned radical preacher Abu Hamza.
The situation was tense because of the group of people who controlled the mosque at that time. We had demonstrations outside the mosque from, unfortunately, from the other extremists, the far-right extremists, coming demonstrating here on a weekly basis. And we have tense between communities during that time.
Mohammed claims that since then the mosque has gone through a process of renewal, with its extremist elements now banished.
We had to move forward and try to bring back this mosque to the Muslim community and to the wider community and keep it away from extremists. It's actually more than a place of worship. It is a community center now. It is youth activities taking place here in the mosque, women activities. And we open our doors to all communities, especially our neighbours around us.
However, their public relations campaign has so far failed to gain universal approval. The mosque and its congregation have been the focus of increasing hate attacks.
We have women being pushed by, they were with babies in pushchair and being pushed in the middle of the street. This mosque was subject to white powder, for example, being sent to us by post. Cartoons, which is very nasty drawing about our prophet, about our religion, about our book, about our community. All these sort of hate crimes is happening here at Finsbury Park Mosque, and it's happening in other mosques and community centres around the country.
The children who come to the mosque here, and thousands of other Muslim kids across the country, are learning early on that not everyone approves of their religion. And some fear that could be the trigger for terrible future repercussions. Aisha was just 12 when she began to be bullied at school because of her parents' faith.
I can remember the first day my mom came to pick me up from school wearing a hijab. It was like an alien had arrived. Everyone was staring and I couldn't really understand why. And the next day at school, the girl who was supposed to be my bestie, she ran off with another girl, and that's when it all started. Sometimes it would be name-calling, you know, like Paki this and Paki that, or Taliban child. But what I remember most is the slaps and kicks, the spitting in my lunch. Once I was waiting in the hall and one girl punched me so hard in the head, I literally fell to the ground and blacked out. These things you don't forget.
Aisha left school 5 years ago, but according to Tel Mama, issues around Islamophobia and bullying in the classroom have become more prevalent since then.
Obviously, it's not intentional Islamophobia, they're kids, but the awareness even of the words that you need to use and whatever we're hearing out there in the news is impacting even the schools and the children. In one of the schools, the kid got called a Paki terrorist and he had a knife on his throat, or a sharp-headed knife on his throat, and that's, we're talking about the school.
At another school in Bethnal Green, pupils were asked to write about their experiences as Muslim children, and almost all of them recounted incidents of bullying.
2 men gave us dirty looks because I was wearing a scarf, and as I walked past them, they threw their milkshakes at me.
When I was small, my mother wore a hijab, and every day the neighbours would throw eggs and rubbish on our doorstep. One day they started throwing rocks at my mum. From that day, we told the police, and then we moved.
Some children on the bus started throwing things at us. When we tried to get off the bus, they stood in our way and started calling us Taliban and terrorists.
Some people working to counteract terrorism believe that children who are repeatedly exposed to Islamophobia are more likely to become radicalised.
If there are issues around bullying, anti-Muslim hatred, that sense of them feeling prejudiced or discriminated, those wider societal factors can lead them towards a path of violent extremism.
We have had cases where, sadly, individuals who've suffered many anti-Muslim incidences have actually said there's no hope in this country, they don't feel they have a future in this country, and that's the impact that it's had on them. Now, what is of concern, what is of real concern for us is the vulnerability that starts to develop in individuals where they actually feel possibly it might be better if I leave the UK. It might be better if I go and join the Islamic State. So there is this issue of extreme groups using anti-Muslim hate and Islamophobia to draw in individuals as cannon fodder. And that is why we need to address this issue.
After years of bullying and feeling like an outcast, Aisha says she became the perfect prey for extremists and found herself being groomed by them.
It started off as a thing where I just needed people to talk to as I felt so alone. So I went on chat sites and then people say, "Oh, let's talk privately." 2 particular women I was talking to basically groomed me. They would message and phone me every day, asking me about my problems at school and at home. Then after a few months, they started saying things like, England is a bad place, that all non-Muslims are only out to harm us. I began to slowly realize what was going on.
Aisha tried to end contact with the 2 women, but they began to send her threatening messages.
She said they know my address and where my mother worked, and that I should get back in contact, or she, meaning my mother, would suffer a fall, and there would be other punishments for me. That's how she put it. Another time, during a phone call, she said, I can get you a flight to somewhere nice where people will welcome you. Everyone is Muslim and will understand your pain. So they kept playing with my mind. I honestly think their aim was to get me to Syria. I have no doubt about it now.
Aisha managed to sever ties with the women only by moving home and changing her identity. Her story might be a sign of our times, but thankfully only a very small proportion of vulnerable young Muslims end up on the path to extremism.
I feel like I'm almost on a daily battle with Islamophobia, and in the media I see headlines like Islam needs to change, and then online forums people say like Islam is backwards and is of the devil and it hurts me.
It's you guys are blowing up this, you guys are blowing up that. As you said, 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and minority are doing it on the name of Islam. That shouldn't label all of us.
In Wandsworth, at London's oldest mosque, these young Ahmadiyya Muslim men admit prejudice is a constant presence in their lives, but they say turning to extremism would be a betrayal of their faith and their country.
We are British Muslims. Yes. Yeah. We've been brought up here. This country's given a lot to us.
Someone, a young, adult within the UK, British-born, he can take it in this way, saying that, because they're calling me a terrorist or because they're saying so much against Islam, therefore I'm going to go and, fight a battle or wage jihad in Syria for Muslims.
Becoming that terrorist because of the Islamophobia that you face, that is not the correct way to go about it. You shouldn't become the stereotype that people are labeling you as. The correct way to go about anything is to go out and to prove through your conduct that you are a proper Muslim.
For Joni, however, exposing her children to such hatred is too big a risk. She's moved her family to Whitechapel, an area she thinks is predominantly Muslim and perhaps safer.
Do you worry that you're coming to an area where you're almost cutting yourself off from the rest of society, that it is a mostly Muslim area, that you'll be almost separate?
I wouldn't say that I'm cutting myself off from people who aren't Muslim, because I feel that the people responsible for Muslim isolation is the non-Muslims themselves, because they all love to say, oh, Muslims don't want to integrate and they don't want to like us and they don't want to live alongside us. But then when we do live alongside you, for example, myself, You don't want us here. You tell us to go, leave the country. You tell us to get out of your area. You physically harm us. So why would we want to live around these people when they're shouting abuse at us and telling us to go home all the time?
What Joni and all the other women who've shared their stories reveal is that there are real divisions emerging within many of our communities. It's a scenario that extremists, both Muslim and far-right, thrive on. And only real efforts to promote equality and tolerance on all sides will ensure that those divides and that hatred remains the exception and not the rule.